right, so what are you waiting for? I think we know who we're waiting for, but what are we waiting for? This season of Advent is a season certainly of waiting. It's a season of expectation about concerning the birth of Jesus Christ, the Christ child that comes to us. But it's more than just that. There are so many modalities of this experience called Advent as we continue to explore our faith and take those next steps on this journey. We're reminded of the words that Jesus shared in a parable with his disciples just a day or two before his death, when he tells the story of a king who said, "Blessed are you when you fed me when I was hungry. Blessed are you when you clothed me when I was naked. Blessed are you who welcomed me when I was a stranger from a strange land. Blessed are you who visited me when I was in prison with no one to care." So what are we waiting for? Jesus always explained to his disciples in that upper room, he said, if you're my follower, if you believe in me, if you believe in the things that you have been taught, I tell you the truth, Jesus said, you will do greater things than I did. I promise you that. And so we as disciples in the year 2020 are invited to ask the question, what are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? What shall we do? Well, Advent this year is different, that's for sure. 2020, here we go again. It's kind of the same old saw, but I think I've remembered every Advent of my life right through the Christmas season. It didn't matter who was preaching, who was teaching, the same lament would come out, that things are going so fast. We're doing so much, going here and there and trying to prepare for the season and doing all the things that we do, that we don't have time to even really hardly explore the meaning of the season, you see. Well, maybe this year is a little different. Maybe this year, because of the situation we find ourselves in, we have even a stronger opportunity to hear the still small voice of God and to recognize that God is waiting for us in some respects as much as we may be waiting for God. There are people in our lives, including ourselves, who are uniquely suffering this year. We feel a sense of some sort of isolation, a sense of not knowing for sure where we go next. We share the challenges and the pains and the fears and the frustrations that are uniquely besetting us in this time. But at the same time, we're invited to slow down and to open our hearts and minds to the possibilities that await us. Every Sunday, I talk about compassion a little bit, that curious mixture of shalom, that curious mixture of compassion, mercy, justice, and forgiveness. And right now, during this season, I think it's particularly useful for us to allow and to understand and to reflect upon the meaning of compassion in our lives, the ability to recognize pain and suffering in those we know and in those around the world, our own sense of pain and suffering that is part of our existence, and to recognize that God's love deals with and can tend to this particular pain and suffering. That we are invited to give that love to another who is isolated or fearful or concerned. We're also invited to receive that same love, to recognize our brokenness needs to be tended to as well. And I know that oftentimes we say it's better to give than to receive, but I tell you the truth, a life that does not receive love is also a life of sin. We need to be able to open our hearts and minds to those in our midst who are willing and wanting to give us a little extra hand. Because you see, if we try to do it alone, we're denying the divinity of the other who is reaching out to help. It's so important that we recognize this is a two-way street. Compassion goes back and forth, back and forth. Jesus fully understood this. Sometimes we, being too busy, are a little bit like the priest and the Levite walking down the road, passing the wounded stranger on to Jerusalem. We're too busy to take the time to be fed and to feed others. But we have that opportunity to do so this very moment. I'm reminded of a story of a person I knew very, very well. She was a young mother, and about at the age of 36 or 37, she had a bad cancer, and it took over her body, and she had 4 young boys. And she was a woman of faith, to be sure, but she was a character, sometimes hard to understand. Sometimes people dismissed her more than they should have, to be sure. She kind of always felt like an outsider looking in, and to know her, I could understand why she might have felt that way. She felt like her life, even though she had these sons and she loved them desperately, may have had no other meaning outside of the house, as she felt a little bit of ridicule from others, not as compassionate. But one day, in the midst of her struggles, she recognized that the purpose of her life had finally come, not only to be the mother of these 4 sons, but as her life was winding down, she opened her house, she opened her hands and her arms to allow others to care for her and for her children and for her family. Her husband was doing all he could. He was working. He was trying to make money. He's doing what he could. He was always around as much as he could be, but she needed a lot of help. And she went to the people of the church and she talked to the priest, and people understood. And all of a sudden, there were groups of people that gathered around this household and started to share what they had, and they organized. Somebody would come every day, right, to bring food and to care for the children a little bit, to do a little bit of cleaning, this and that. This group grew to a group of about 20 people. And they prayed for her and the family, and they watched out for the family for the last year of her life. And then she finally dies at the age of 40. But she left something behind. Not only did she leave her sons, but she left a community that found new meaning through her life and through her death. They shared that compassion, and they grew together as well. And so we have this opportunity to fully explore that sense of giving and receiving love. It's around us all the time. There are people in our midst, and we need not look necessarily too far. One other story I thought about was a friend who I met in Grand Rapids. His brother was a priest, and he was taken, this is 25 years ago or so, And his brother was quite taken with Mother Teresa, and he was a priest in the diocese there in West Michigan. And so he goes to Calcutta, and he meets with Mother Teresa, and she asks him, "Why are you here?" This was at the height of her ministry. He says, "Well, I'm here to serve you and the good people of Calcutta." And Mother looked at him and said, "Well, where are you from?" He said, "Well, I'm from Grand Rapids." And she stopped and she thought a moment. She says, "Grand Rapids? I am told there are a lot of hurting people in Grand Rapids. And so what I want you to do is spend a few weeks with me and go back and care for those who are hurting there as well." It all starts, my friends, with our own homes, with our own neighborhoods, with our own church. But as we continue to care and feed each other and grow deeper in this dimension of God's mystery, our hearts and our minds open up to even more that God is waiting for us to see and do. And so I pray that you will stay awake, stay woke, stay aware, open yourselves and open your hearts and minds to the mystery of all that is around you. Experience this season of peace, recognizing that God is with you every step of the way. Amen.